a briefing on 2119.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill number 2119, as amended by the House Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, would discontinue the Kansas Affordable Housing Tax Credit Act on July 1st of 2025, except as provided for certain allocations. The Kansas Affordable Housing Tax Credit Act provides for income, privilege, and premium tax credits for qualified developments in an amount equal to the amount of the federal tax credit allocated by the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation to such qualified development, and those provisions started with tax year 2023. The federal tax credits that we're talking about here are the Section 42 low-income housing tax credits. The amount of the Kansas credit is the same amount as the federal tax credit. There's a couple things to know about the Tax Credit Act. The Qualified Allocation Plan, the KHRC administers the federal low-income housing tax credit program in Kansas and adopts an annual qualified allocation plan pursuant to federal law to facilitate making those allocation awards. The credit period relating to these tax credits, the tax credit allocation or award is for each year of the credit period, and a credit period is a 10 taxable year period beginning with the taxable year in which the building is placed in service or the succeeding taxable year at the election of the taxpayer. There's also a provision in the Kansas Tax Credit Act that there is a carry forward. If there are unused excess credits for a taxable year, those credits may be carried forward as a credit in future years for up to 11 tax years. Now, the bill itself, House Bill 2119, as originally introduced, it would have amended KSA 7932-306 to discontinue the act on July 1st, 2025, except that the provisions would continue to apply for the credit period and any applicable carry forward period for those affordable housing tax credit allocations that were awarded to the owner of a qualified development by the KHRC before July 1st of 2025. The House committee amendments, though, modified that exception to allow the provisions of the act to continue to apply through the credit period and carry forward for those allocations to the owner of a qualified development by the KHRC with respect to a qualified allocation plan for the years up to and including the 2025 qualified allocation plan. So instead of those being allocated before July 1st, 2025, they extended that exception to the 2025 allocation plan. There were a couple additional provisions included by the committee. The no allocation of a credit shall be awarded by the KHRC subsequent to the 2025 qualified allocation plan. And then there were some dates included regarding applications and approvals of applications. It's my understanding, looking at the 2025 qualified allocation plan, it looks like those dates are what are the dates that are provided in the current 2025 allocation plan, qualified allocation plan. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book. And the bill passed the House on February 20th of 2025 on a vote of 85 to 36. And I would be happy to stand for some preliminary questions.
Committee, do we have questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. So there were no proponents that have requested testimony. So we'll go to the opponents. And the first one we have is Dustin Ware with the Kansas Action for Children. And we'd like to keep our comments to 5 minutes or less.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Alley, members of the committee. My name is Dustin Hare. I'm the Economic Security Policy Advisor for Kansas Action for Children. The point of my testimony today is to not explain how the tax credits works. There are developers here who are better suited to do that, but to show why they're so badly needed. To do that, I want to touch on some of the main data points from my written testimony. So rents have gone up 20% on average across the state since 2019. As a result, 43% of Kansas renters are now considered cost burdened. Property taxes have skyrocketed. That's not news to anybody here. But in my neighborhood, people are paying double what they were paying in just 2019. And perhaps the most alarming statistic, the number of Kansans experiencing unsheltered homelessness increased by 395% between 2019 and 2024. So it quadrupled. I want to touch on some anecdotal experience that validates the data points I just shared. In my previous role, I worked directly with people experiencing a variety of housing issues. Unhoused people couldn't find a place to live. They would reach out because they wanted to improve their situation, but more times than not, we also couldn't find them a place to live. There just weren't any places available. Today, I still hear nearly every week from renters who have fallen behind on rent. They're looking for assistance to get them caught up. Maybe they lost a job or something. They just need help with a month or two. I give them a couple phone numbers to call. They've already called those phone numbers. There's no assistance available. We also have dozens of homeowners in my community where I live in Wyandotte County who have fallen behind on their property taxes. They're in danger of having their homes auctioned off next month, and there's no assistance available for them. It's clear we're in the middle of a housing affordability crisis. Kansans are feeling the effects of this problem today, and there's no real clear path out of it. When I look at the price tag of the affordable housing tax credit, $25 million year one, $50 million year two, and so on, up to $250 million, I don't share the perspective that we can't afford it. With the rate of homelessness and quadrupling over 5 years, that's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. I urge this committee to keep housing in the budget. If we can't figure out a way to fund the program as it currently is, then I urge you to find a compromise. I've heard ideas like reducing the term of the tax credit from 10 years down to 6 or 7 years, or eliminating the 4% program and preserving the 9% program. We'd be comfortable with any of these ideas. But we need more affordable housing to be built before we pull the funding completely. That's all I had for today. Thank you for your time, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
We'll wait for questions at the end. Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony. Next, we have Mitch Robinson of KEDA. Mitch?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, my name is Mitch Robinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Salina Community Economic Development Organization, but I'm also the current president of Kansas Economic Development Alliance, which is our statewide association representing 76 communities and over 100 economic development professionals across the state. So it's my pleasure to be here and represent them today and talk about a little bit of the experience we have in Salina from our housing situation. But this bill 2119 is of great concern to our membership. All across the state and actually all across the country, we're faced with housing issues, lack of affordable housing, lack of the availability of any type housing in some communities. In 2020, August of 2020, we had two major announcements the same week. Swan's Foods announced a $600 million plus expansion, over 1,200 new jobs. The same later that week, Great Plains, Kubota announced a new construction equipment investment of over $250 million. That's now somewhere in about 800 new jobs that they've created. At that point, our community realized that we knew we had a housing issue, but we could see that one coming. So we went through the process of updating our housing study, and the city came out with the use of tools that we had never used before for housing: industrial revenue bonds, The rural housing program and the program we're talking about here today has been used by developers since then. And we've got over 1,000 different units, different types in process of construction or already completed. So we're helping to fit that need. But we see this as being a long-term issue for Salina, for the state. And we encourage you all to look at opportunities to make a compromise on this bill and look at alternatives that could help keep aspects of this program. So that's kind of my remarks. I'm not going to go on. We've got a lot of people here that want to talk, and I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Next, we have by WebEx, is that correct? Tony Loman? WebEx is on? Tony, are you on? Tommy, excuse me.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I work for Sugar Creek Capital. I'm a housing policy director. Before I took that role, I ran Georgia's housing program, but I look at different policies across the nation dealing with housing and affordable housing for communities and the relationship to economic development and impacts on the state. We're here in opposition to HB 2119. Our company does invest in affordable housing, so that's outside money coming into the state to build the affordable housing. But we work with Kansas-based developers to build that housing, and a lot of local subcontractors and providers of materials. So we just wanted to say that we're here in opposition, and I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Terry Humphrey with the AIA. Welcome, Terry.
Chairman Alley and members of the committee, I am Terry Humphrey, Executive Director of the American Institute of Architects, Kansas chapter. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of AI Kansas today in opposition to 2119. I would like to say to you that AIA and AI National and AI Kansas both have policy platforms that support public investment in affordable housing as an essential component of livable communities. Architects play a vital role in community building and housing development, and they are keenly aware of the housing shortage that we have here in Kansas. As you know, and it's been stated, communities need quality, affordable housing, and we lack housing in all areas, low income, moderate, any kind of housing, we lack it. As a result of that, we think that our Kansas affordable housing program is very, very important and that it should continue, and we want to stress that here today. As you've been told, we have this great need, but a recent study showed specifically that in the rural areas just alone, annually rural areas need somewhere between 3,800 and 4,800 new housing units built every year, and that's just in rural areas. So since the establishment of this affordable housing tax credit program, we have already seen a benefit. We have seen approximately 6,500 homes across Kansas that have been funded. We certainly don't want to lose that benefit. And as the speakers before me have shared with you, this is so important that we hope that this committee will find a way to ensure that affordable housing continues to, and the support, public support of it from the state of Kansas, continues to be your priority. Thank you for the time today, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Next, we have Tony Corniche. I didn't get that right, but I'm.
Kresnik, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And thank you, committee. As Chairman said, my name is Tony Kresnik. I'm a Kansas resident. I'm the owner of Flint Hills Development Group, and owner of Kennedy Glass. I'm on the Kansas Chamber of Commerce Manufacturing Board, member of the 2024 Leadership Kansas class, but today I'm here speaking on behalf of the Kansas Housing Association and the Affordable Housing Development Community. Real quick on KHA, for those of you that weren't able to hear me speak this morning, we represent 67 organizations, lending organizations, construction companies, and the industry experts for affordable housing. While we adamantly oppose House Bill 2119, we do greatly appreciate the House's measures that they took to preserving the qualified allocation plans for the years 2023, 2024, and 2025. All that generated private investment and all of which were signed into law, not into law, but all of which were signed by Governor Kelly, 2025 being signed in October of 2024. How we got here is in 1986, Ronald Reagan passed the federal affordable housing tax credit bill as part of Section 42 of the tax code. Since that time, there's been extreme bipartisan support for the program. That program single-handedly represents over 90% of all affordable housing developed, what we're coming up on in the last 40 years. However, here for Kansas in 2022, there was also a bipartisan measure taken which created the state affordable housing tax credit program. And the reason for this was because we realized that we were drastically short on affordable housing. When you combine rural areas and the local MSAs here in Kansas, roughly 10,000 units short per year. And at that time, we were averaging about 462 affordable units that were being built. Since that program, we've had great success. In 2023, with the state program, we were able to develop and are currently developing 2,138 units. Which is over a $540 million investment. Without those credits, that would have been an 87% reduction, or the loss of 1,858 units, or a loss of $465 million of investment, of which 80% plus stays right here in the state of Kansas. 2024's numbers look very similar. Without that state program, we would have lost 2,272 units, or a loss of $458 million of local investment. Again, approximately 80% of that stays here in the state of Kansas. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. A couple of things that I did want to touch on that have come up over the last few weeks. One question has always been, I think the term robbing Peter, to use Paul, was used in the House. Well, the developers receive all the money. On average, from a project cost standpoint, the developer fee, which is really the only time a developer has a chance to make any reasonable return on their risk, it averages somewhere between 4 to 7% of total project costs. So I wanted to clear that up. Another topic that was brought up a couple of times is that this program is bankrupting our state. And while the numbers I'm going to give you are not referring to the return on the investment, by the way, in the case of the Georgia report, $5.71 for every state dollar that goes out comes back to the state. I wanted to go over the program. If it did not change at all, the program was founded in 2023. 10 years into the program in 2033, the investment to the taxpayers would represent 2.54% of the total revenue collected by the Kansas General Fund. That does not include inflation. With inflation, that would be less than 2% to the Kansas General Fund. We do have a compromise, and as I stated before, I am speaking on behalf of the development community. We appreciate that there's fiscal issues with this state. Our compromise would be to reduce the amount of the tax credit starting in the year 2026 going forward to $8.8 million per year, or a 65% reduction. Essentially, we would follow the 9% credit. We would not ask for any money. To the 4% credit, however, we would like to ask the Kansas Housing Resources Corporation uses those dollars as they seem fit. Real quick, in year 13, after the $8.8 million was implemented, that would represent 0.89% of the state's revenue, not taking into account inflation. After taking into account inflation, it would represent less than 0.5% of the state's general fund to tackle one of, if not the largest challenges that our state of Kansas has. I appreciate your time, and I'm here for any questions in the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Lita. She's on WebEx. Are we on WebEx?
Hello, yes.
Yes.
I
Okay.
couldn't hear the name, but I'm guessing that was me.
Yes. That was close. I was hoping it was.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, my name is Talita Lycum. I'm an Overland Park, Kansas resident, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker who provides mental health services at a community mental health center. There's been a lot of great testimony speaking to the economic side of this at this hearing and previous ones, but I'm here to speak to the human impact of the lack of adequate affordable housing in Kansas. At some of the previous hearings, I heard it said that we had, quote, plenty of other housing programs that are, quote, working well. My team and I spend hours and hours assisting clients in navigating the resources that we have, and I'm very confident in saying that the programs are not plentiful and they are not working well. Most eligible people spend months to years waiting to get on the HUD housing wait list, where they spend months to years waiting for a voucher. Once they have a voucher, individuals often wait for months to find an available home and often repeat the search when their landlords stop accepting the HUD vouchers or the voucher goes into abatement because the condition of the apartment is not in compliance with HUD standards. According to the Johnson County's Housing Authority, my county lost 2,840 housing units that accept HUD vouchers during the pandemic, and we will see a significant number of LIHTC properties exit the program in the next few years. I currently work with multiple individuals and families that would be homeless if not for the AHTCA and LIHTC programs. My goal as a therapist is to assist people in their recovery from trauma, abuse, and severe mental illness. I spend far too much of my time providing crisis services to individuals contemplating suicide because they are or will be homeless, and providing assistance to people who can't afford food or their $15 medication copays because they've spent their entire income on housing. I see people repeatedly in the ER and having contact with law enforcement for issues directly related to their homelessness. This is a committee on commerce, but your decisions also affect the health, mental health, and lives of the people I serve. They're the most vulnerable people in Kansas. It's kids, the elderly, those with serious illnesses, and survivors of abuse. I'm asking you not to eliminate one of the very few affordable housing sources that we have, and instead to partner with stakeholders and industry groups to reach a compromise that will allow the AHTCA to continue to save lives. I'm aware of multiple recent needs analysis and reports with specific recommendations that could help with this process, and I'm happy to refer anyone interested to these. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, we have heard all of the proponents, or opponents, I should say, proponents. We do have one neutral, Aaron Beckerman. Aaron?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Erin Beckerman. I'm General Counsel at Kansas Housing Resources Corporation. KHRC, as we've already discussed, administers the Federal Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, or LIHTC as we refer to it. And the state credit that was passed in 2022 pairs with that program, so KHRC administers the state credit as well. You all have a lot to consider with House Bill 2119, and so I'll try to be brief, but I do want to kind of highlight what KHRC has seen since, as the program administrator, since implementing this program and the impact that it's had on Kansas. So hopefully you can kind of have a clear picture of how the program works and what its impact has been as you make your decision. So most importantly, this program has helped us make significant progress in addressing our state's housing needs. All the other conferees have attested to the significant need that all Kansas communities have when it comes to housing. And with this program, what has really helped is that it does pair with an existing program. The Federal Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program has been around since the 1980s, and KHRC has staff in place to run that program, and we were able to really hit the ground running and implementing the state credit that pairs with that program. So with that credit, we have now tripled our housing development. In 2021, before this credit, we were able to fund around 1,000 homes with the federal LIHTC program. And now since 2022, we have funded around 4,800. And that increase is due to the state credit. With more resources, we can reach more areas. The map it's in your materials. You can see that we're touching more counties with our housing programs. And we've also got a list of every project that has received a state credit at the end of our materials, so you can see exactly where all of those projects are and how many credits they're receiving. But, you know, communities like Colby, Russell, Hillsborough are all have received credits that typically would not have received it, and that's because of the state credit. We're also able to do some larger apartment complexes. We have a couple projects listed there in Manhattan and Lenexa that again are due to the state credit passing. We've been able to leverage the federal private activity bonds, which is a resource that historically has really been left on the table and very underutilized here in Kansas. As an example, in 2021, we had one affordable housing development utilize that federal resource in the amount of about $5 million. And now in 2024, we have, I want to say it's 14 or 15 developments that will be utilizing the federal private activity bonds in the amount of around $250 million. So again, we're really capturing that federal resource. I think other conferees have talked about this too, but there is a map in your materials that shows you what other states are doing, just so you can kind of keep that in mind as you make your decisions. The majority of states do have a state credit that pairs with the federal LIHTC program, including all of our neighbors. And it's important to keep that in mind as we talk about trying to attract developers and contractors and investors to Kansas. We're in competition with our neighbors of getting those folks here to build the housing that we really desperately need. I know other conferees have touched on the economic benefits of getting development here, getting those investments in our communities, so I won't belabor that point. The last thing I just wanted to point out, there was one concern that we had with the amended House Bill 2119. It's the last couple sentences that were added to subsection I. Instead of referencing the state credit specifically, the kind of more general, broader term of low-income housing tax credit was used. And we do have some concerns, and we've talked to other attorneys that work in this area that have some concerns that that language could arguably restrict our ability to allocate federal low-income housing tax credits as well as the state credit. I don't believe that was the legislative intent. I think it's meant to just address the state credit, but because that broader term of low-income housing tax credit was used in those sentences, it could create some confusion. So I just wanted to flag that for you all. And I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, are there any questions of any of the conferees? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My ears kind of perked up, and I think it was Mr. Kirsch and Mr. Robinson talked about maybe a compromise proposal and a way that, and I think kind of where I am and what I'm interested in is there a way that we could right-size this program? Is there a way we could make it work for Kansas, work for our current needs? You talked a little bit about compromise. I think it was 8.8%, or could you maybe two questions. One, can you give a little more detail of what that would look like? And two, is when you say a compromise, is that something that all the opponents, to the best of your knowledge, have agreed would be a satisfactory compromise? Because that to me is where I think we need to drive to, is what can we do to continue to support this type of housing in Kansas, but do it in a way that makes sense given other needs?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I've got to ask, opponents to the bill or opponents to the program moving forward?
Opponents to the bill. There's, the coalition of yourself and all these other written opponents to 2119. Do you think that all the folks who are opposing this bill would then be supporters of the compromise that you mentioned? Because I was intrigued by that.
Obviously, I can't speak for everybody, but I am speaking on behalf as the leader of the private sector and the leader of the housing force here when I mentioned that we have internally spoken about limiting the credit equal to the 9% credit, which again is 8.8 million credits per year. And we've had very positive conversations with legislators, both on the Republican side and Democratic side on the House as well as the Senate. And again, I did that math, and it is a reduction of 65%. Obviously, when we're developing 2,500 units through the LIHTC program per year, and we need 10,000 plus, we're going the wrong way, but we also appreciate that there does need to be a compromise. And that was the logical way to do it, would be to limit it to the federal 9% credit, which is, for example, I believe identical to what the state of Nebraska has. And as mentioned before, Nebraska, Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado, they all have a state LIHTC program.
Well, I appreciate trying to drive toward a compromise, and I certainly am appreciative of that effort, and I'm very intrigued by that idea. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Senator Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's also for Tony. Previously, in another Senate hearing, I asked what was the definition of affordable housing, and you came and talked to me afterwards about it. Could you relate to the committee on what is the definition of affordable housing? Because I think that everybody has a different definition of it, and I think every community does as well. I know, for instance, this program has been utilized in my community. I would argue that I don't think that what has been utilized, what I would deem affordable, but I think that I have a different definition than everybody else. So I'd like, what is the definition of affordable housing?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. In the context of Section 42 tax credit developments, it's 60% of the area median income or less. There are projects that can ask for what's called an income average approach, which is you can go up to 80% of the area median income, so long that the average provides housing for people that make 60% of the area median income and less. And I believe the reason that they went up to 80% was just so that they could have a larger range and provide something for everybody, or at least something for most people in need. But yes, for the context of this, we're not talking about HUD programs, we're not talking about Section 8, we're talking about quality affordable housing, and the average would be 60% AMI or less.
Thank you, Mr. If I could follow up, could you put that in even more layman's terms? I mean, I'm talking like monthly rent. What are we talking here?
If you don't mind, let's talk about Lawrence, Kansas, and don't hold me too close to this, but I think we'll be close. We would rent out a 60% AMI unit for somebody that makes about $40,000 a year.
So in that situation, then do you divide that by 12, and then how do you decide what the monthly rent is?
You can charge up to 30% of the take-home, I believe, unless that number has changed. In the case of Lawrence, Kansas, I believe on average, one bedroom, 60% AMI unit, the renter might pay $700 a month instead of $1,400 a month, or whatever the economics would lend for, new construction market rate.
So, sorry, Mr. And to follow up on that, so in that situation, I mean, we utilize Lawrence in that situation. Do college kids apply for this, or no, not in that situation?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Traditional college students are prohibited from the program with very, very few exceptions.
Okay, thank you very much.
I believe in Lawrence, Kansas alone, I personally represent close to 200 affordable housing units. I do not believe I have one traditional college student living at any of my affordable housing communities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Something we heard in a previous meeting, it probably is worthy of you adding some additional color. You had made the statement that without these credits, there would be a lot less houses being built. I wouldn't mind you touching on that. I would also say both of my counties, Leavenworth and Wyandotte, utilize this program significantly, and it has added a lot of value. So the comments also about improving the program, because it does create risk, and adding in some layer, it sounds like you're very open to creating some kind of a optimizing where it sits today, so we don't have as much overhang risk for the state. Teed you up there with a few things, but I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Senator. Going back to 2022, when we had bipartisan support for this bill, and to this day, believe it or not, I still believe that we do. Without any state LIHTC program in 2022, when we all agreed, or at least almost all of us agreed, that we needed more affordable housing due to inflation and due to interest rates going up, we would have received 40% less units going back to the period in time when we needed more, right? We still need more today. However, if we're going to just take a look at 2023, what we're able to do, we would have seen an 87% reduction in the amount of units, or a loss of almost 1,900 units. In 2024, we would have seen a loss of 87.5% of those affordable housing units being built, specific or estimated at 2,300 units approximately. Thank you.
Senator Reichman?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. Very enlightening, enlightenment, a lot of enlightenment there. When you just talk about all the building that's and housing and I don't know, I'm in Southwest Kansas, and it just seems like everybody needs a place. Do you have any idea where these are being built across the state, the housing, how this program has helped? Do you have any idea? Help me out on that. Thank you.
I believe that the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation provided a map for you all. I cannot speak to exactly those counties. I know it is published. I looked at it the other day. I apologize for not having that information with me. But I would like to touch on one misconception, and hopefully this helps answer your question. One of the questions that came up during HB 2119 in the House many times over is how many unique development firms are involved in this program, or I believe that the line of questioning was, do the same companies get all of the deals? And the answer to that question is absolutely not. Based in the qualified allocation plan, there are rural set-asides for these programs. There's multiple types of set-asides: new construction, preservation of existing affordable housing. But no, not all areas, not all MSAs get all of the deals. It is spread adequately throughout the state, and I think Aaron might be a little bit better to speak to that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just trying to think back, I believe I actually voted for this legislation earlier, and that there was some kind of a bipartisan. But looking at the recent vote, 85-36, doesn't appear. I mean, Mr. Chairman, I'm just curious why the House didn't take any of this or look at the compromise issues, or is there anything, or anybody can speak to that a little bit?
Can't speak
how we got here?
But I know what we can do. Appreciate it.
Well, I'm impressed. So if I recall in the testimony, they're saying there was over 6,500 homes built already. Was that the number that was thrown out there?
I believe, let me see here. Thank you, Senator. In 2023, and this is only in regards to the state low-income housing tax credit program, not all of the other programs that KHRC has, but in 2023, they were able to issue the development of 2,138 units. In 2024, 2,596 units. And again, as mentioned before, we are also working off of the qualified allocation plan for 2025 that has been signed by Governor Kelly. So we can estimate that there would be roughly another 21 to 2,600 units that are able to be built through the 2025 qualified allocation plan.
Thank you for that. And I think, Mr. Chairman, it would be good to look at something at this. So,
Senator, if I may, we did not get to the point with the House where we were discussing the exact numbers of the compromise, which this is the first committee that I've released actual numbers on a potential compromise too. As you can imagine, it took us coming through a lot of data, talking to investors and the development community to see what would be a reasonable compromise that we believe that legislature could live with.
Senator Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Tony, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for being prepared for the conversation, because the data and the information you provide is so incredibly important. You know, it's from my perspective, when I originally heard about this problem at the beginning of the year, it was definitely terrifying, right? To think about every year that this exists, the state is incurring $250 million in liability. And it's easy for 250 to become 750, and then it just goes on and on and on. And so I can understand in some ways why the House moved as quick as it did to do what it needed to do, right? We're trying to watch budgets. But I really appreciate you coming up and hopefully the document that I had a chance to you show me earlier will be shared with the committee, because it helps, I think, understand it not quite as linear, but more horizontally in understanding the actual out-year impacts. And I really, really appreciate your willingness to bring forth a potential solution, something to talk about, another way to look at it. I do think that there is still very much bipartisan support for housing and housing credits. I also realize, though, that credits are sometimes the easiest thing to cut in the name of budget savings, right, and revenues. And so there's got to be a balance to be found in these tighter years and when we're looking at negatives in the out years. And so all of that just to say thank you for providing that, being willing to sit down and work with us and hopefully find a little better solution.
Before the meeting, I committed to Chairman Alley that I would not only provide that document, but we already have amendment language proposed that you all will see hopefully before the end of the weekend on the actual compromise itself. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Questions? Yes, Senator Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure, when we were talking about, you've utilized the term units. Are we only talking about apartment complexes? Are we building single-family homes, so forth?
We're building single-family homes, we're building duplexes, we're also building apartment units. However, I will say the majority of these units are located in traditional, quasi-traditional apartment communities because that's where we get the largest economies of scale. I will also, even though I'm not an expert on the topic, I will say that the Kansas Housing Resource Corporation has a lot of other programs that do focus more on single-family. And while the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Program does some of all, primarily we're looking for economies of scale and hence multifamily developments more times than not.
Thank you. I appreciate that it's not only just apartment complexes and that we're building to everybody across the board. So I appreciate that.
And one of the things I think I failed to say over the last few weeks here is that there's also a program where an affordable housing tenant can buy their unit if it is single family at the end of the 15-year compliance period. So I believe KHRC has gone out of their way to provide something for everybody in that regard.
Senator Reichman.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Since you're already up here, when you're working on the compromise, I was intrigued by Erin Beckerman. She's concerned in section I about the language. I would like to have you at least contact her and see what has to be done there too.
I will.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? Or any of, we do have written opposition only. I'd like for you to call our attention to that. And are there any other? Thank you very much for being here. Yeah, we already had her. Any other comments or questions? I will say that we will not be meeting tomorrow. We do have a meeting on the 10th, and we'll be discussing House Bill 2291, and on the 11th to be House Bill 2340. We'll have a hearing on those, and we will, if we have time, work bills previously heard. So with that, thank you very much, and we are adjourned.